made it to where Chris Paul is the scapegoat. He's the problem. Clearly, there's something else going on behind the scenes. So now you get a fresh-minded Chris Paul.
Chris Paul's trade to the Toronto Raptors just shook up the NBA. Once a cornerstone of the Clippers, Paul's abrupt departure came after being treated like a scapegoat by the team. Now, he's finally speaking out about what really went down behind the scenes. And trust me, it's not what you expect. Let's break it down. The trade and what it really was. On February 4th, 2026, the Los Angeles Clippers, Brooklyn Nets, and Toronto Raptors agreed on a multi-team trade, sending Chris Paul to the Raptors and Ochai Agbaji, a 2032 Raptors second-rounder, and cash to the Nets. The Raptors wanted to get under the luxury tax line. Shipping Agbaji's salary to Brooklyn got that done. The Clippers wanted to save approximately $7 million in luxury tax penalties and open up a roster spot. Brooklyn got Agbaji, a distant second-round pick, and $3.5 million in cash from the Clippers to take on the salary. 3 teams, all accounting, no basketball decisions. The Nets even sent the draft rights to Vanja Marinkovic, a 2019 second-round pick playing overseas, back to the Clippers just to balance the paperwork.
So Chris Paul was just traded to the Raptors, and it looks like they're going to work with him to find his next home.
That was the surface level story. A minor 3-team trade where all 3 teams win on the spreadsheet. But the real story, the one that had been building since early December, was everything that led to this point. Because this trade did not happen in a vacuum. It happened because the Clippers had a 12-time All-Star on their roster, a future Hall of Famer who came back to the franchise where he built his legacy. And they handled it so poorly that every detail that leaked out made the organization look worse.
Crazy, like Chris Paul had so many great memories with the Lob City Clippers, and it's just very unfortunate that they ended up disrespecting him in the final year of his career.
Paul had signed a 1-year, veteran minimum contract worth $3.3 million on July 1st, 2025, after being waived by the Warriors. He was 40 years old. He had announced this would be his last season. He chose the Clippers because this was where he grew up as a professional. The Lob City years, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, the alley-oops, the playoff runs, the franchise records. He wanted to end it where the best memories were. The Clippers brought him in as a veteran mentor. They wanted him to instill professionalism in a locker room that lacked vocal leaders. He participated in off-season workouts. He hosted team events. He aligned with head coach Tyronn Lue's vision. Everything looked right on paper, and then the season started, and everything fell apart. By the time December came around, Paul had been given a final warning by Clippers president Lawrence Frank about being divisive. He and Tyronn Lue had stopped speaking to each other for weeks. He had gotten into multiple verbal confrontations with associate head coach Jeff Van Gundy, and when the Clippers lost to the Miami Heat on December 2nd, got stuck at the airport for 6 hours because of mechanical issues with their plane, and finally made it to a hotel, Lawrence Frank met with Paul in a hotel room around midnight to tell him he was done. Paul pleaded his case. He even brought in a teammate, reportedly center Mo Bamba, as a character witness to vouch for his positive impact. It didn't matter. Frank was firm. Paul was told to go home. The team flew to Atlanta without him. He had to book his own commercial flight back to Los Angeles, and at around 2:40 in the morning, he posted on Instagram, "Just found out I'm being sent home." That post, 5 words and a peace sign, set off a chain reaction. Every reporter in the NBA started digging. Every insider started talking. And what came out over the next 2 months, leading all the way up to this February 4th trade, exposed the Clippers from the inside out. But to understand how it got this bad, you have to start with what happened between Paul and the coaching staff. The coaching confrontations. The tensions between Chris Paul and the Clippers coaching staff did not build slowly. They erupted in specific, documented incidents that revealed a coaching hierarchy that felt threatened by a veteran who had been running basketball teams for 2 decades. The clashes with Jeff Van Gundy were particularly combustible, rooted in a fundamental disagreement over whether a player of Paul's stature had the right to offer input on the floor. The most detailed incident took place on November 29, 2025, during the Clippers' 114-110 loss to the Dallas Mavericks. During the 4th quarter, Kawhi Leonard entered the game after sitting for a stretch and was assigned to guard Klay Thompson. Leonard was cold. He hadn't warmed up yet. Thompson was cooking. Paul, sitting on the bench, watched this happen and did what he had done for 21 years as a point guard. He spoke up. NBA reporter Chris Haynes broke down exactly what happened during that timeout.
That occurred from a game against the Dallas Mavericks, the last home game they played. It was in the 4th quarter. Kawhi Leonard is on a minute restriction, and sources told me that when he was guarding Klay Thompson, he was struggling when he got into the game after sitting down for a while. He was struggling keeping up with Klay Thompson. And so there was a timeout call late in that fourth quarter. And during the fourth quarter, during that timeout, Chris Paul went to Kawhi Leonard and said, hey, man, are you fresh enough? Do you feel good? You feel like you can stick with Klay Thompson? And he asked the teammates, he said, hey, y'all might want to switch this.
Paul suggested switching the defensive assignment. He didn't command it. He asked Leonard if he was fresh enough. He told teammates they might want to consider putting someone else on Thompson until Leonard got warm. It was a suggestion. Thompson had already hit 5 or 6 threes at that point. The team ended up switching the matchup. The next day, on the team plane, associate head coach Jeff Van Gundy called a meeting with Paul. Van Gundy asked Paul if he had changed the defensive assignment during the game. Paul said no. He had suggested it, not commanded it. To prove his point, Paul stood up on the plane, walked down the aisle, and asked Kawhi Leonard and Chris Dunn to recount the exchange and confirm his version of events. This public challenge made things worse. Van Gundy reportedly told Paul that while he might have had leeway to make those kinds of adjustments on previous teams, he did not have that leeway here. That word, leeway, stuck. Days before his dismissal, on November 28, Paul had posted an Instagram story featuring the dictionary definition of the word leeway. At the time, people didn't know what it meant. Now it made sense. Van Gundy had used that exact word to shut down Paul's input, and Paul put it on his Instagram without saying anything else. As Haynes explained, this was just one of several verbal incidents between the two in a very short span.
And so I was told that Jeff Van Gundy told Chris Paul, listen, you might have had leeway in other places to be able to, to change up defensive coverages, but you don't have that leeway here. And that was just one of the minor verbal incidents between Jeff Van Gundy and Chris Paul. That was one of a few in this brief span with the Clippers.
The Van Gundy confrontations were not isolated. There was another incident on the bench during a stretch of 5 consecutive games where Paul received DNP-CD. Paul and Van Gundy were seated next to each other. Neither spoke for an extended period. The silence dragged on until Paul broke it by sarcastically asking Van Gundy if he wasn't talking to him. Van Gundy scoffed and questioned Paul's sincerity. Multiple sources witnessed this exchange. It illustrated just how personal the strain had become between a veteran who wanted to contribute and an assistant coach who saw that contribution as a threat. Paul's relationship with head coach Tyronn Lue deteriorated on a separate but parallel track. Early in the season, they had been aligned. They had collaborated during off-season workouts, but as the losses piled up, the Clippers started 5-16, Paul's critiques of coaching decisions grew louder and Lue's patience thinned. On November 8, 2025, after a game where Paul was benched for the second half, Paul called Lue for what became a 40-minute phone conversation. He wanted to know why his role was being reduced. The call turned heated. It was the last real conversation they had. For weeks afterward, Paul and Lue were not on speaking terms. Paul reportedly requested meetings to address allegations that he was a negative presence. Lue refused. On November 9th, the day after that phone call, Paul met with Lawrence Frank, who issued a final warning about being divisive. 2 days later, on November 11th, an off day after a loss to the Atlanta Hawks, Paul was allowed to address the team. He apologized. He said his critiques came from a good place. He said he just wanted the group to improve. It didn't matter. The cracks were already too deep. 3 weeks later, they sent him home from Miami. Former player and current analyst J.J. Redick, who played alongside Paul during the Lob City years, laid out why the coaching staff's approach was the real problem.
The emphasis on getting it right is much more important than the emphasis on being right. And so getting a play right or getting something correct, you may overlook something, right? You got a million things to look at, right? Especially the end of games. There's a lot of stuff happening. So as a coach, it feels like you should welcome ideas on how to get it right. And the next day after you've had time to sleep on it, like approach that situation in a non-confrontational way.
The coaching staff chose confrontation. They chose hierarchy over collaboration. And when it all came out publicly, it painted a picture of coaches who would rather silence a Hall of Famer than listen to him. But the coaching issues were only half the story. What was happening inside the locker room was just as revealing. The locker room and the stars who said nothing. The coaching confrontations told one part of the story, the locker room told another, and the locker room story was arguably more damaging to the Clippers' image because it revealed a team culture that was hollow, a group of highly paid professionals who barely communicated with each other, led by 2 stars who preferred silence over leadership. The Clippers' locker room during the 2025-26 season was described by multiple insiders as unusually silent, minimal off-court interactions, a dormant team group chat that saw little activity beyond basic logistics. No one was talking, no one was leading. Kawhi Leonard, the franchise centerpiece, was known for his low-key demeanor and focus on individual preparation over vocal motivation. James Harden, the team's leading scorer, was laid back to a fault. Neither filled the leadership void that every struggling team desperately needs. Paul walked into this environment and tried to change it. He activated the group chat. He organized off-court bonding activities. He encouraged open dialogue. He addressed performance issues directly in film sessions and team meetings. He did what he had done on every team he had ever been on. He held people accountable. And this locker room did not want to hear it. As one insider put it, Paul's reputation for wearing on teammates was nothing new. It had followed him for over a decade.
And Chris Paul, and I've been hearing this for over a decade.
He's a dick, they said.
I wasn't going to say that.
They say he's a dick.
But he wears on people. I'll say that. Teammates say that he wears on people.
He's hard to get along with.
He's hard to get along with. And so if you all... I remember when Allen Iverson was late to practice every day for his whole career. But when he came back to Philly that last time and he lost his first step, suddenly being late to practice was a bigger deal.
Yeah, now it means
because you're not right. Mm-hmm. Chris Paul's always warned people, warned on teammates, but now that you're not the guy that can give you 20 and 10 every night, they don't want to hear that shit.
That comparison to Allen Iverson was revealing. Paul's intensity had always been his calling card. When he was the best player on the floor, it was called leadership. When he was a 40-year-old on a minimum deal logging DNPs, it was called nagging. The substance hadn't changed, the context had. With Kawhi Leonard specifically, Paul frequently offered unsolicited advice, often in his ear, about various aspects of play and team strategy. Initially, it came from respect. Over time, Leonard reportedly grew sick and tired of the persistent critiques, especially while dealing with his own injury management and load restrictions. Leonard valued Paul's legacy, but found the constant input exhausting. When Paul was dismissed, Leonard and Harden learned about it through social media. They weren't consulted beforehand. They were publicly shocked, but privately, sources indicated there was relief among some players that the discord was over. Harden's position was complicated by history. When the Clippers approached Harden about Paul's potential signing in the offseason, he was reportedly not fully enthusiastic. Aware of Paul's demanding nature from their time together in Houston from 2017 to 2019, where stylistic clashes had already strained their partnership, Harden publicly kept it diplomatic after Paul's December dismissal, saying the problems were not just Chris and that the front office's decision was out of his hands, but the subtext was clear. Harden had been through this with Paul before, and he knew how it would go. One person who wasn't surprised by any of it was former teammate James Harden himself, and insiders confirmed there was growing tension between Paul and the head coach that accelerated the whole breakdown.
I think from what I've heard from some players in the league this week is that there was a significant tension between him and Tyronn Lue that had grown over the course of the year, and so Tyronn Lue didn't want him back.
What made this so damaging for the Clippers was not that Paul clashed with people. That's happened on plenty of teams. It was that the organization had no mechanism to manage it. There was no mediation, no honest conversations. No one sat Paul, Lue, and Van Gundy down in a room and said, let's work this out. Instead, the coaching staff froze him out. The front office issued warnings. And then they sent him home in the middle of the night. The locker room culture was not just quiet, it was avoidant. And when things got uncomfortable, the organization chose removal over resolution. Udonis Haslem, who spent his entire career with the Miami Heat and knows what a functional locker room looks like, said the bare minimum was a conversation, and Paul never got one.
I am one of those guys that I will refuse to let one guy take down 15. So if you're the one guy that's disrupting the locker room, you have to go. But that's also a situation where if Chris Paul is the one guy, he still deserves an opportunity to sit down with the head coach and figure it out. I'm not going to backpedal on that. I'm standing by that. As a former player, T. Lue, who's been in that locker room, it should be an open door policy for all players, whether you agree what they got to say or not. It should be an open door policy, eye-to-eye communication, man to man. And whether we agree or not, we at least got it off our chest.
The irony was suffocating. The Clippers brought Paul in to be a leader. He led. They didn't like what leadership looked like when it challenged the people in charge. And so instead of adapting, they cut him loose and called it a mutual parting. But the problems weren't just on the court or in the locker room. They went all the way up to the front office and the owner's suite. The front office and the owner who disappeared. Lawrence Frank issued a statement the day Paul was sent home. He said the Clippers were parting ways with Chris and that he would no longer be a part of the team. He said Chris is a legendary Clipper with a historic career. He said no one was blaming Chris for the team's underperformance and that he personally accepted responsibility for the record. Those were the official words. Stephen A. Smith was not interested in official words.
Put the camera on me, please.
I don't give a damn what Lawrence Frank. I don't like what he did. I don't have much of a relationship with Lawrence Frank. I've always respected him. I remember when he was the head coach of the Nets. I remember when he was the head coach of the Detroit Pistons.
And then he laid out the core question that the entire NBA was asking.
How the hell do you do this to Chris Paul? Now, this is a future Hall of Famer who come there for the last year in his career. I don't give a damn what's going on with the team. They're trash right now. We understand that. They have the worst superstar in the sport.
The organizational mishandling went far beyond a poorly worded press release. The details that emerged about the night of December 2nd into December 3rd were staggering in their lack of professionalism. After the loss to the Miami Heat, the Clippers plane had mechanical issues that stranded the team at the airport for nearly 6 hours. The players eventually went to a hotel. Sometime around midnight, Lawrence Frank met Paul in a hotel room to deliver the news. He was done. Paul, blindsided, made an impassioned case for why he should stay. He emphasized his contributions, his desire to mentor the team, his willingness to adjust. He brought in a teammate to vouch for him. Frank did not budge. The team flew to Atlanta the next morning. Paul was left behind. He had to arrange his own flight home. The news broke publicly through his own Instagram post in the middle of the night. The Clippers did not announce it first. They did not control the narrative. They let a 40-year-old legend post a screenshot to social media at 2:40 in the morning, and that became the story. Stephen A. broke down exactly why this was so disrespectful.
To do this to him, to let you on a road trip and you send him home? You send him home, doggy? This ain't about, whatever. We could talk about CP3's and his credentials, Hall of Fame, because I know you and I will get into that. But don't tell me he deserves this.
What amplified the mishandling into something truly corrosive for the franchise was the silence from the top. Steve Ballmer, the Clippers' billionaire owner, did not reach out to Paul at any point after the decision. Not a phone call, not a text, nothing. This was a man worth over $100 billion who had watched Paul legitimize his franchise during the Lob City years, who had seen Paul make the Clippers relevant in a city where the Lakers owned everything, and he couldn't pick up the phone, Blake Griffin noticed. On a podcast, he said he was disappointed for Chris Paul and disappointed in the Clippers, specifically calling out Ballmer's lack of involvement. Lou Williams added context on his own platform, indicating that Paul's criticisms of the front office were the straw that broke the camel's back, which suggested the front office was more offended by Paul pointing out their failures than they were interested in fixing them. And then for 2 months, from December 3rd, 2025 to February 4th, 2026, the Clippers kept Paul on the payroll without a role. He trained at the NBPA-owned facility, stayed in shape, and waited. The Clippers paid him to sit at home. They couldn't find a trade partner, partly because Paul's contract had minimal value as a 1-year veteran minimum deal, and partly because the saga surrounding his departure made teams cautious about bringing him in mid-season. The entire limbo period was an organizational failure. They couldn't integrate him, they couldn't dismiss him cleanly, and they couldn't trade him quickly. They just let it linger until the trade deadline forced their hand. Stephen A. connected this dysfunction to a much longer track record of front office decisions that have defined the Clippers under Lawrence Frank.
Lawrence Frank is more of a cancer to the team than him. What have the Clippers done? Is it that the man that traded Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and about 4 picks for Paul George? Is it that the man that assisted in letting Kawhi Leonard blackmail y'all into doing that so he wouldn't end up a Laker? Wasn't that on Lawrence Frank's watch? And you gonna send Chris Paul home? You gonna disrespect a future Hall of Famer and a consummate professional in this league for 2 decades, the former president of the Players Association, like that? I mean, please. Hey, listen, and I'm just getting started.
The front office failed Paul, the owner ghosted him, and the 2 months of limbo made it worse. But the thing is, none of this was new for the Clippers. This was a pattern, and it stretches back decades. The pattern, why this keeps happening to the Clippers. The Chris Paul saga did not happen in isolation. It fit into a pattern of organizational behavior that has followed the Clippers for decades, a pattern of mishandling players, bungling communication, and making decisions that prioritize short-term convenience over long-term reputation. The shadow that hangs over everything is the Donald Sterling scandal of 2014. Sterling, who owned the team for 33 years, was recorded making racist remarks about black people, including criticisms of Magic Johnson and instructions to his girlfriend not to bring black attendees to games. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver banned Sterling for life, fined him $2.5 million, and forced the sale of the team to Ballmer for a then-record $2 billion. The scandal erupted during the Lob City playoffs, derailing a promising run. Former executive Elgin Baylor had sued Sterling in 2009 for age and racial discrimination, claiming he was forced out after criticizing what Baylor called a plantation mentality. The suit was dismissed, but it left a mark. Even after Ballmer's purchase, the organizational culture never fully reset. The Sterling years embedded a dysfunction that successive management groups have struggled to erase. Under Ballmer, the spending increased dramatically, the payroll ballooned, the Intuit Dome was built, but the player management issues continued. In 2018, the Clippers traded Blake Griffin to the Detroit Pistons just months after signing him to a 5-year, $171 million extension and featuring him in promotional campaigns that promised a committed future. Griffin later said the team had lied to him about rebuilding around him, Paul, and Jordan. The trade was widely criticized as deceptive and disrespectful, the kind of move that makes players question whether the organization's word means anything. Then there was Paul George. After years of pairing with Leonard, George left in 2024 free agency for the Philadelphia 76ers on a 4-year max deal when the Clippers refused to offer the same terms, citing luxury tax concerns. George went on his podcast and described feeling undervalued, the front office's caution with money on a team owned by one of the richest humans on the planet pushed away a star in his prime. And then there was the ongoing management of Kawhi Leonard, whose chronic knee issues led to the entire 2021-22 season being missed and large portions of subsequent years. The Clippers' medical and training staff prioritized long-term health to such an extreme degree that it hampered team chemistry and playoff readiness. Teammates grew frustrated. Opposing players joked about it. Stephen A. had been asking this question about Kawhi for years, and the Paul situation finally put the hypocrisy on full display.
You know what? He's spending his money wrong. He's investing it wrong. He's made the wrong investment. How many times have I been on the air saying, why are you investing in Kawhi Leonard? You talk about somebody that should be sent home. You know why you can't send him? You know why you can't send Kawhi Leonard home? Because he's always home.
Always home.
Jerry West's departure added another layer to the dysfunction. The legendary basketball executive, who had played a key role in recruiting Leonard and George to the Clippers, left in 2020 feeling marginalized and later joined the rival Lakers front office. When one of the greatest basketball minds in history walks away because he feels sidelined, that tells you something about how the organization values input from people who know what they're doing. All of these incidents created a cumulative impression among players and agents around the league. The Clippers are not a place where loyalty is rewarded or where communication is prioritized. They have the money, they have the arena, they have the market, but they don't have the culture. And the Chris Paul situation became the latest and most public example of that failure. Through it all, Paul kept his composure. When he finally spoke publicly on the Kevin Hart and Kenan Thompson show, he didn't trash the Clippers. He didn't name names. He just said what was on his heart.
Listen, I'm working out and training every day.
Okay.
Right? In all honesty, with the way all that stuff went down and all that, I think for me, I just love this game so much that I don't want it to end like that. You know what I'm saying? So I've enjoyed the time. I've enjoyed the time for sure. You know what I'm saying? I get a chance to go to my kids' games, but I don't know yet.
He didn't need to say more. Paul's legacy with the Clippers will always be defined by Lob City, the wins, the highlights, the transformation of a franchise that nobody cared about into something people actually wanted to watch. But this final chapter added a different kind of truth to the record, and the Clippers have nobody to blame for it but themselves. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.